I know. What about Michael versus Jason? No. What about Jason versus Freddy versus Michael? Fuck that. What about Pinhead versus Leatherface? Screw that. What about Ghostface versus Leatherface? They both have face in the name. What about Chucky versus Ghostface? Screw that. You need Leprechaun against Chucky because they're both small. No. What about Pinhead versus Chucky versus Leatherface versus Ghostface versus Michael versus Jason versus Freddy? What about that shit? It's a fucking shit show! What you think you see, what you think you hear, that's what it's about. Mood and atmosphere. No, it's fucking garbage. It's garbage. Mood and atmosphere. Now that I really like. That's what I'm looking for. That's what I want to see. Hey folks, how you doing? Dave McRae here. If I sound a little raspy, it's just because I finished a 2-hour and 10-minute live AMA with you guys. That's what I'm shooting this. But during that live AMA, somebody asked a question about crossovers again, and my thoughts on crossovers. Well, I answered this question about a week or so ago in a video that I posted where I was answering sort of 5 common questions that I get. But I decided to do a video dedicated to it specifically because I wanted to have a video on my channel that I could just immediately point people to. And also, I know a lot of you guys really like the idea of crossovers, really like this subject, and are even huge fans of the 2003 film Freddy vs. Jason. Listen, I understand that crossovers is not a new thing. I mean, if you go back all the way back, decades, to the Universal monsters, right? You had like Dracula versus the Wolfman, and Frankenstein versus the Mummy, or whatever the case is. I mean, there was a few of them. And so I know that the idea of crossovers with horror titans is certainly not a new thing. But in this day and age, there's something about it that feels just a little spoofy to me. I'm not a big fan of the idea. I never have been. I wasn't really a big fan of the movie Freddy vs. Jason. I mean, certainly it was cool from a nostalgic perspective to see these two titans on screen. But at the end of the day, it wasn't really a great movie. Not in my opinion, anyway. And it seems like in this day and age that seriously entertaining the idea of doing crossovers is only done when they've exhausted all the other ideas in their respective, series. Right? So it's like, well, we've done this. We've taken Jason to Manhattan. We put him in fucking space. Freddy's playing video games. Let's put them together. I mean, and it's kind of like, why don't you just let it go? Why don't you just stop? It's okay for stories to end. I'm just saying. It's just too spoofy to me. Listen, in my opinion anyway, okay? The whole idea of a crossover, the kind of crossover that we're talking about, in and of itself, is very spoofy and sensational and satirical. So in order for it to work, you have to take the most sensationalized versions of all these different characters, whether it's Chucky or Freddy or Jason or Michael. And the most sensationalized version of all these different characters isn't necessarily the best version of all these different characters. Listen, when it comes to Freddy Krueger, okay, arguably the best version of Freddy Krueger, certainly the scariest version, is the version from 1984's A Nightmare on Elm Street, the very first film. You could also point to the sequel a year later in 1985, Freddy's Revenge, as also a version that was incredibly scary. Some could even argue that it might even have been a bit scarier than the first movie. But anyway, for the sake of argument, certainly that first movie. That version of Freddy Krueger is not going to find himself in a crossover film with Jason from Friday the 13th Part 7. The New Blood, or Jason Takes Manhattan, or Jason Goes to Hell, or Jason X, right? I mean, Jason X, he's in space, okay? Jason Goes to Hell, people are eating bodies and becoming him or some shit like that. I can't even fucking remember now. It's been so long since I've seen that shit show. And then you got 8, he's in fucking New York. Okay? And then in part 7, there's the telekinesis shit, and this girl's using her mind to toss Jason downstairs, and it's cool, Dave, it's cool. Yeah, but it's there's some spoofy satirical elements to those later films. So that Freddy in the first Elm Street, it's a dead fucking serious horror movie. So you're not going to find him pinned against that version. Now you could say, okay, well, what about Freddy Krueger from A Nightmare on Elm Street being pinned against Jason from Friday the 13th Part 2 or 3? Because those are more serious films. You could take that Jason and take that Freddy and do a crossover. Well, here's the problem. Friday the 13th Part 2, 3, and 4. Yes, you could make the argument that that is the more serious Friday movies, okay? Relatively speaking, in comparison to the rest of the series. The Friday movies as a whole generally are not really revered as serious horror movies per se. Certainly not on the same quality as the first Halloween or the first Elm Street, but relatively speaking, they are certainly par for the course of what horror slasher movies were in the early 80s. But the problem is, because they take themselves seriously, and because the whole concept and idea of the kind of crossover we're talking about is spoofy and satirical in nature, it just doesn't work. They would never find themselves in the same universe. They would never find themselves in the same movie. So again, in order to actually have a crossover, you have to go to the extreme. And that's what they did with Freddy vs. Jason. You get the most extreme, sensationalized versions of each character. You didn't get Freddy from A New Nightmare. You didn't get Freddy from the first Elm Street, no, you got some sort of hybrid between 5 and 6 Freddy. You didn't get Jason from 2, 3, or 4. No, you got some sort of hybrid between Kane Hodder and, the Jason X Kane Hodder. Some big hulking guy. Because that's how it's going to work. That's the only way it could work. And those are the best versions of the characters. And it seems cheesy to me. Chintzy. It devalues any integrity, if there is any, that their respective series and characters have left. They're already jokes to some degree because of the so many shitty movies that they have. It's almost like it's a mockery. And if you want Jason and Freddy and Michael and Chucky to be taken seriously again, you got to start from the roots. You got to start from the foundation. The last thing you want to do is cross them over in a fucking movie together. No. And I don't want to see Michael Myers being punched in the face or somehow tossed over a table. Listen, I make fun of Halloween Resurrection a lot. And one of the things we all make fun of course, is Busta Rhymes, right? Trick or treat, motherfucker. Okay, but it's not just him. It's not just trick or treat, motherfucker. Okay? It's Michael Myers being drop-kicked karate style through a fucking window. You remove Busta Rhymes from the equation. You remove Trick or Treat, motherfucker from the equation. Replace Busta Rhymes with just some regular actor, okay? And take out the Trick or Treat, motherfucker. If the actor is still drop-kicking Michael karate style through a window, it's still fucking stupid. It's made worse because it's Busta Rhymes. It's made worse because he says trick or treat, motherfucker. But it's still fucking stupid. You remove all that and you're seeing Michael Myers, the boogeyman, get drop kicked through a window like this is some Karate Kid film. It's fucking stupid. And in a Michael versus whoever crossover, you're going to see a lot of that because the whole idea is of these titans fighting. And I just don't like it. I don't like seeing Freddy fight these other characters or, I understand that Jason is built for that. And Leatherface and Ghostface, you could make the argument that they are the least sensationalized of all the characters. They didn't really become sensationalized per se. Their movies did, Scream less so, because Ghostface isn't even a real guy. He's a bunch of people, so it's just a costume. So that character isn't a tangible person. It's anybody. Anybody can be Ghostface. So he didn't necessarily get sensational, and Leatherface not so much. He was pretty consistent in terms of the character. He's pretty one-dimensional, at least from my recollection. And I'm not insinuating that Ghostface and Leatherface come together. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that they're probably the least sensational out of them, but nobody's clamoring for a Ghostface versus Leatherface. It's usually Chucky versus somebody, or Jason versus Michael, Michael versus Freddy. Jason, that's usually the crux of what people want to see. And I just don't think it's going to work. So it's not something I want to see for that reason, because the best versions of these characters are not the versions that we will see in a crossover. And the best versions of those respective characters don't belong in a crossover anyway. So it becomes moot to me at the end of the day. Listen, when I watch a Friday the 13th movie, Halloween and Michael Myers exists in that universe. It does. But you want to know how it exists? It exists in the sense of Alice could go to the video store and rent it as a movie. Glenn and Nancy from Elm Street can go to the video store and rent Friday the 13th or Halloween and chill on the couch and watch it on a Friday night. I'm not saying that you have to start showing these kinds of things in horror movies. I'm just saying that that's how I see it. That's how I think. Very much like what they did with Scream, right? What's Halloween? It's a movie they're watching. There's no crossing, universes here. And I'm not saying that every horror movie going forward has to show that. I'm just saying that when Scream illustrated that, it was cool because that's how I always sort of pictured it, was they exist, but they don't exist in the literal sense in each other's universes. And for me, because there's so little integrity left with these characters and these series, that you start crossing them and using the most sensationalized versions of these characters, you're going to destroy any integrity, if there is any, that these series or these characters have left. And again, it's the kind of crossover that we're talking about. I mean, it's not that crossovers can't exist or work. Look at the MCU, look at Godzilla, right? But those crossovers were built from the foundation up. The whole point of those movies, the whole point from that foundation was to actually cross superheroes and have them in each other's films and all that kind of stuff. Freddy, Jason, Michael, Leatherface, Chucky, it wasn't. So, and because it was never designed that way, and you're sort of, the only reason why you're crossing them now is because you've run out of ideas of what to do with their respective characters in their own series, now you have to create this weird hybrid universe and sense this weird narrative that justifies them being in the same universe when that was never the intent. So it never really plays out to me as organic. It just feels like, oh yeah, it feels like I'm watching a spoof. Like it's not serious. And maybe that's the whole point. Maybe you're like, but Dave, that's the whole point. Yeah, maybe. But it doesn't bring any integrity to the character or characters. It doesn't help, studios want to create serious versions of these characters. And it certainly doesn't help the general mass audience, the mass movie-going audience to see these movies like the way we do, the originals and the intents of these characters. And I just, it's fun, sure, it's fun from that nostalgic perspective. When I saw Freddy versus Jason, it's fun. But it's not a serious movie. It's a mockery in some respects, in my opinion. So I just want them to be left alone. I just want them to be left alone. Anyways, folks, my name's Dave McRae. Comment below and let me know your thoughts. If you want to follow me on Facebook, you can at facebook.com/manythingsdavemcrae. That's where I tend to post in the meantime and in between time when I'm not posting here. Link is in the description, as well as links to my Twitter, my IMDb, my merch store, my Patreon, and my official website. If you want to check those links out, you're more than welcome to. So yeah, in the meantime and in between time, I will talk to you guys soon. Cheers.